Oh, okay. I just got the recording, so we're all good. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Ansible 101 webinar. Today, we will be going over everything Ansible and introducing you to the newest Ansible 2 platform. But before we begin today, I'm going to go over a quick company overview, showcase a little bit of what we will be talking about today, introduce our presenter, and then how you can obtain more information after the event. Today I have with us John Walter from the Red Hat team, as well as Alex Unger. Can you guys see my screen okay?
Yes, we can.
Okay, cool, perfect. So I will kick us off, and then I will kick it off to you shortly. Okay, so welcome everyone to the Ansible 101 webinar. I will go ahead and kick us off and introduce you guys to who we are here at Fierce Software. Fierce Software is a small woman-owned business specializing in reselling enterprise open source software for our public sector customers with a specific focus on federal system integrators. Specific value-add elements that we bring are innovation brokering, license management, professional services, formal training, and custom technology enablement workshops. Our perspective as a reseller means that when we hear your goals and technology challenges, we respond from the perspective of our portfolio and not as a single vendor solution. We love to be an innovation broker, getting our customers access to the smartest people and the best technology we can find. We like to hear the entire challenge and take the ownership of finding our customers a complete solution. Oftentimes that can be more than one vendor. However, today we're specifically talking about Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform. In addition to being an innovation broker, we provide several other value adds. If you need professional services as a part of an install or for ongoing access to professional enterprise, we work with vendor professional services teams and can bundle those for you. This is both uncleared and cleared resources. We also provide access to formal training. Today we are going to be diving into specifically Red Hat training, and this is something that we have provided for quite some time now. Today's webinar is an example of one of our technology enablement webinars. We design these as free sessions to share best practices for your implementation to your team. If you see anything today that fits, we'd love to follow up with you. And if this wasn't a fit, let us know where we can fill the gaps and meet your specific needs. We are happy to help. Now, speaking of all the enterprise open source vendors Fierce Software represents, I had to put a humble brag out there today to show all the awards we've won. We are proud that our work serving public sector customers has resulted in such a full trophy case in such a short time. Now, let's take a look at what we're going to be presenting today. So in the Ansible 101 webinar, Red Hat is excited to introduce Red Hat Ansible Automation Platform 2, which was just announced at AnsibleFest 2021. The main focus was to enhance the foundational pieces of the Ansible platform. This webinar will highlight the benefits of using Ansible to automate tasks across a variety of Red Hat Enterprise Linux, Windows, Cloud, and other networking devices. Our speaker, John Walter, the Solutions Architect, Training and Certification Specialist at Red Hat. John is a certified Red Hat architect with a deep knowledge of Red Hat Enterprise Linux and its layered products. If formal training is something that you and your team are looking to get your hands on, our new and improved Fierce Software web store has a vast showcase of the many training courses Red Hat offers. Please feel free to browse along after the workshop or the webinar. After the webinar, you will be receiving an email from myself, Olivia Mangum. Please feel free to contact me with all of your training needs, and my information is provided below. In addition to training needs, please give feedback on what you liked about the webinar and what we can improve for next time. Now I will go ahead and stop sharing my screen, and I will pass it over to our presenter today, John.
Awesome. Thanks, Olivia. And give me just 1 second to share.
Yep, and I will go on mute.
Awesome. Oh, sorry about that. There we go. All right. Well, I'm John Walter, Solutions Architect for the Training and Certification. I have been at Red Hat about 6 years now, and really excited to talk to you all today about Ansible Automation, Ansible Automation Platform, and give you a little bit of insight into some of what we just announced, Ansible Automation 2.0. Just really excited. So we'll jump right into it. Before we really dive into the Ansible piece, I want to give you all a little bit of context. If you're not familiar with Red Hat, what our portfolio. Obviously, we're kind of like the open source organization, and over the last, I would say, 5 or 6 years, there's been a lot of concerted effort of expanding beyond just our Linux footprint. Really, Linux and kind of middleware have been our bread and butter for at least the first 15, 20 years of the organization. And within the last few years, the portfolio has really kind of expanded. So we really look at it, really divided into these three pillars. The first of which is hybrid cloud infrastructure. This is everything in the public private cloud, bare metal servers, virtualized infrastructure. This is where RHEL would sit. We have the cloud native app platforms side. This is where Openshift, Kubernetes, container platform, middleware services live. And then the third piece is this management and automation side. Go ahead and hide that. And that's where things like Ansible Automation, Red Hat Satellite, Red Hat Access and Insights, all of those live as well. And so that's really what we're going to be talking about, right? And really the goal of this pillar of these products is to really help to easily and seamlessly manage not just Red Hat platforms, but really all the platforms, automate across your entire environment. And automation has been obviously a really huge focal point of the last several years. It's really kind of an added challenge, right? In a lot of different IT teams, it's common to have multiple domain specific tools. The networking team, they're going to have their own tool typically provided by their networking vendor. You have your infrastructure team, typically maybe they're using or building their own automation, bash scripts just running in their cron tab. Security teams might have something like a Nessus or Twistlock or something like that. And those tools are rarely integrated with each other. And additionally, those teams are often kind of automating in silos, right? They're often isolated from each other, meaning that there's integration across the chains is often really, really limited if it even exists at all. And so the challenges don't even really stop there, right? The people inside one team, they have different motivations, they have different bases of knowledge. If you bring multiple teams together, those perspectives can clash. And a person who fills a persona in one team can fill a different persona on another team. If you have an expert developer that needs to consume network resources, or security operations remediation workflow that's being managed by an IT operations specialist, it can cause conflicts sometimes. And so really what we're trying to achieve here is breaking down this. We want to automate out in the open. We want all of these different teams to be speaking in a shared language and something that can be centrally managed and operationalized, right? IT automation can bring the necessary change to tackle a lot of different channels. You could have you can look at it as integrating the different tools within these siloed domains. You can look at it as streamlining processes across different tools, breaking down the silos between teams and integrating the various tools and processes across those teams. And really, this is about establishing consistent governance of processes, of products, of technologies, and offering a really clear interface to provide and to consume resources as part of the automation, and really providing a clear means to implement new processes and new content to extend the automation itself. And that's really where Ansible Automation Platform comes into play. We're going to be talking throughout this presentation about how Ansible Automation Platform is meant to really simplify collaboration, coordinated automation across your entire IT infrastructure. And so throughout this, we're going to be talking about how Ansible kind of improves efficiency, how it increases productivity, how it controls risks, and even minimizes expenses and things like that. But we're definitely going to spend some time talking about the bits as well. So we'll dive right into it, right? So why are customers choosing Ansible Automation? Is there just a single turnkey solution from a product perspective? Not really, right? Components and problems that are found in each IT department are often really similar, but the actual combination of these challenges together with the actual products that and tools that are in use are often really unique. The situation is always kind of evolving and changing over time. And so that means there can't be a single turnkey solution that solves everything once and for all. And so that's why the solution has to be a platform, a platform that can be used to build a solution that's tailored to the individual needs of the actual use case and to grow that for further development. And so that's what the Ansible Automation Platform is really designed to do. And so what is if you're familiar with Ansible, you may be asking, like, what's the difference between Ansible and the Ansible Automation Platform, right? The characteristics that make Ansible really popular, and we'll talk about kind of the differences of, Ansible the product versus Ansible the platform in just a little bit, but we really boil it down to these kind of three characteristics, and I'll actually start in the middle here. So we talk a lot of times about how Ansible is simple. It's a simple nature. Ansible language is based on YAML. It's a markup language. It doesn't require any kind of development experience. You don't need to be a Python developer. If you've worked with like Puppet or Chef in the past, like, you don't have to be an expert with recipes. It's a really, really kind of low barrier to entry to get started, and you don't need to be, a subject matter expert. You certainly don't need to be a developer to actually start developing these automation scripts. The simple nature of Ansible enables a really broad selection of users to become functional in a really short space of time. Left side, the powerful piece, the power of having just that single universal language across multiple technologies. There are a lot of different use cases that we're going to cover throughout this presentation today, and all of them can be managed with Ansible, and really all of them are easy to get started with, right? And so just the sheer amount of different use cases, a lot of the times I talk to customers and their first question when I'm talking about Ansible is, well, we use Puppet, what's really the difference between Puppet and Ansible? And Puppet is a great configuration management, but it really stops at configuration management, right? That's the use case for Puppet. Whereas Ansible has so many other kind of processes that we can automate at scale beyond just, simple configuration management. And then the third piece here is the agentless side, right? Ansible is an agentless model that allows seamless integration with a variety of different technology platforms. On top of that, it means that whatever it is that you're trying to automate against, let's say you're automating, 1,000 Linux servers, you don't have to have an agent running locally on those systems in order to actually automate against them. All that you need is to be able to connect to them. The same way that you, a user, would be able to connect to that Linux box, that's the same way, those same protocols, SSH, Windows, it's WinRM, maybe it's an API call for a specific network device. All of those are, the same kind of protocols that you would have established within your organization already. Ansible is going to be able to leverage those same protocols to connect to those devices too. You don't have to have an agent running on those endpoints, which means, one, that's one less thing to manage, and two, that's one less thing to exploit, right, or to worry about being exploited. And so the platform, Ansible, the platform, enables an enterprise to operate and manage with Ansible at the scale and complexity and flexibility that's required by modern enterprises. So I mentioned before, a lot of different use cases, a lot of things that you can do, right? So what does it really mean in kind of tangible detail? What can you really do with the Ansible Automation Platform? So you can do a lot of different things. You can do it against a bunch of different domains. I'll show some examples in a bit, but a few examples, right? You can orchestrate a fleet of VMware virtual machines across, the open hybrid cloud, so across, multiple cloud infrastructure. You can manage the configuration of multiple network devices across multiple data centers, so compatibility with Cisco, Arista, Juniper, Palo Alto. You can enable application deployment to integrate, load balancer changes and CMDB configuration. One of the examples I give a lot of times is if you are a developer and you're looking to push your application into production, well, typically there's a workflow that happens, but there's also things that have to happen with those systems as you want to bring down certain systems, remove them from the load balancer, shut down any specific services, push your application to that server, run a couple tests to make sure that it's started and then that's enabled, then restart the load balancer, cycle it back online, and then move on to the next set of systems. Those are all things that we could do with Ansible. You could embed automated configuration of external services into a CI/CD pipeline, so have full CI/CD capability built into Ansible as well. And then you can integrate, firewalls with intrusion detection into like a streamlined security remediation workflow. So, orchestration, configuration management, application deployment, provisioning or deprovisioning, and then continuous delivery and security and compliance. All of those are use cases, and we can do them against all of these different endpoints. Those endpoints are not necessarily Red Hat endpoints, right? I mentioned a few different examples there across network devices, Windows, obviously all of the clouds, the major clouds that are out there as well, and having integration with monitoring tools that you're already leveraging, the security tools you may already be leveraging, so not having to really reinvent the wheel with what you're already working with within your environment, but being able to leverage your existing tool sets, but build like a unified, manageable automation around that. And here's just kind of a list of some of the vendors that we work with. We have a wealth of like certified content collections, basically, where we have partnered with all these different technology partners that cover all these different multiple use cases. And what we do is we work with them to build out automation. So, yes, with Ansible, you have the flexibility or the ability to really start to build very highly tailored and customized workflows. Or for something kind of simple, if you just want to deploy a virtual machine onto AWS, AWS and Red Hat have partnered together to create automation that you can just consume, and you can edit as necessary, but you don't have to necessarily start from scratch. And so that's part of what the platform is providing. Ansible, the product, is what's actually running and executing the automation itself, but the platform is really more encompassing of a kind of a galaxy of automation available at your fingertips as well. So what does the platform consist of? How do the different components work with each other? So there's a bunch of components within the platform, and that really enables us to build an automation solution that's tailored to our needs or to solve the different problems that we face. A core part that many of you may already know is the Ansible architecture. This is extended by different cloud services which are tied closely to it, and automation would really be nothing without these different integrations and the content that's expanding the automation to the products and the different domains that are out there. Really what this means is that you can use the components that you need, you can build solutions that you require, and when the challenges change, you can adapt really easily that solution with the components flexibility. Who's using Ansible though? What does it look like to actually be somebody that's using Ansible? So I would say there are 3 areas in which the platform is used, and those areas are tied to certain kinds of users or personas. You have the creators. That's typically, your engineers, your subject matter experts, your domain experts. We would call them playbook writers. Playbooks are what we call the scripts within Ansible. We'll show a few examples of that in just a little bit. The second group, the second area is really the operators. This is, maybe automation administrators, network admins, cloud admins, firewall operators, really your operations teams. And they're maybe not necessarily building the automation, but they are certainly executing the automation. They need access to the automation that the creators are providing, and they're the ones that are actually executing it. And then you have the consumers. These are non-automators that are really just looking to use turnkey automation, right? Or maybe they are automators, but they come from other domains. They're just consuming automation that isn't necessarily native to them. So if these are the personas, what does the technology stack really look like? So this is what really we talk about with the Ansible automation platform. And part of that is the Ansible command line, which we'll touch on in just a little bit, where a lot of the creators are actually executing their automation from. We have the different content domains. So in this case, we have a few examples here from an infrastructure perspective, from a cloud network and security perspective. And then we have the layer on top of that. And that's where things like Red Hat Tower exists, which we'll touch on in just a little bit. Automation Hub, the Automation Services Catalog, and then insights for the automation platform. So really the architecture of the platform consists of these core components, which are used by those personas related to the automation, which is indicated there on the left. So we'll dive into a few of these different parts, what they're made of, and how they work with each other from the perspective of these different personas. First is create, right? The create part of the platform is all about actually generating content. We're writing the actual automation code, which in the end is actually going to move the bits. And so at the core of the language itself, in which the content of the automation is actually written in, we start with what the Ansible automation language looks like, how it's written, how it's created, how content written in the language is actually managed. And I mentioned before that it's all written in YAML. That's kind of the structure of these different playbooks, and we'll show an example in the next slide actually. But we need to kind of take the perspective of the people in charge of this, right? The domain experts who know all about the systems in question that's already being, or that are actually being automated. You know, they're the ones that have to write and ultimately maintain this automation code, these playbooks. And so, you know, think of it like, you know, my background, at least before moving into the training certification team, I worked within our support delivery organization, helping customers who were moving away from Bash and PowerShell scripts towards something that could be more managed with Ansible. And so companies that are writing their own automation scripts, they have this huge kind of ever-growing cost of maintenance for those, which includes kind of that ever-growing risk of problems and flaws, and also having to rely on somebody who built that playbook, or I'm sorry, somebody who built that Bash script staying with the organization. A lot of the times I'm working with customers and they're like, hey, I inherited this Bash script that I realized has been around in the organization for 20 years and no one really knows what it does. You know, we know that it executes at the end of the day. We know that, you know, this is what the result is. We know what it's trying to achieve, but we don't really know what steps it's taking to execute to get that result at the end. And so one example, right, maybe you're configuring Cisco switches, and instead of customized Bash scripts, which might be hard to read, especially if you are a network administrator who has no experience working with Bash, there are these standardized short playbooks that leverage the Cisco written integration, which can be read and understood by people that aren't familiar with Cisco or with Bash, right? And so that's what we're looking for, is a standardized language that anyone can read and most people can write. And so this is an example. This is just a pretty simple playbook example. See, it's pretty short. It consists of 3 tasks, and the playbook is looking to achieve 3 things. The language itself is simple to grasp. Each task carries a name statement, so everything is kind of partially documented. So it's quick to learn. There's a low barrier to entry. There's no developer skills required. You do need to have some familiarity with YAML. There is some kind of very specific formatting that goes into YAML, but using like an Ansible lent, or I use Atom when building my playbook, something like that. There's a really easy YAML setting, so you never have to worry about any kind of indentations or issues with that. But this is really targeting a Linux system, but maybe your network operations person can understand this. They can read it, right? There's no need to train them on anything that's alien to their domain. They can go through this, and maybe they don't 100% know how to execute each of these steps, but ideally they should know generally what this playbook is actually doing. So what are these keywords? There's a few keywords in here like yum and template and service. What is behind those? How does this actually work? So we're going to go through and actually break down this example playbook piece by piece. So there are basically 3 main pieces to a playbook. It consists of plays, modules, and then plugins. And so we'll look at a couple of these right now. First and foremost, we have the actual play. So a playbook is composed of 1 or more plays, and it's essentially just tasks in an ordered list. each play executes a part of the overall goal of the playbook. And typically when you start off with Ansible, it's not uncommon for your playbook to just be one play. And the play is defining, which machines are affected. You can see here on the right side, this is just that first little snippet from the example that I was giving before. You can see that the play defines which machines are affected by the keyword hosts. That is just pointing towards an inventory file. It could be a static file. It could be something that's dynamically generated. I've got like a biker gang going by my house right now. It could be something that's dynamically generated by, like AWS or Red Hat Satellite or some kind of other source of truth. But basically, we're pointing this playbook to only execute against all of my hosts under this web grouping. And then there are also connection details that are defined here. So the actual tasks that I'm executing require some privilege escalation. And so this become definition here at the beginning is actually indicating that the system will need to escalate privileges to run certain tasks here. So in the beginning, it's not uncommon that a playbook only has one play. Each play runs, one or more tasks, and each task calls an Ansible module. So let's move into what are modules. What are they made of? So modules are essentially just parameterized components that have internal logic. They represent a single step that needs to be done. The modules are the things that are actually doing things in it. So usually they're written in Python or PowerShell for Windows setups, but they can be of any language. There are tens of thousands of modules that are out there that are certified. But if there's something that is very, very specific to maybe an application you've created or something like that, you can also create your own modules. But essentially, think of modules like you are running a specific command, and you'll see that below the module, in this case, the template module, which is very similar to just a copy feature within RHEL or within Linux or Unix or even on Windows. Essentially, what we have to do with that module is define specific options below that. And so what we're doing here is we're using a template module. Think of it, again, this is essentially just copying something. And then we have two definitions below that. The source, this is what we're copying, and then the destination, this is where we're copying it to. Pretty straightforward. But what are some other ways that we can change the automation, right? Essentially, once this playbook is executed, it's going to execute tasks from top to bottom. Tasks are only executed if a change needs to be made. So Ansible embodies the concept of idempotency. Essentially, we're not going to make a change unless a change actually needs to be made. In this case, if with this copy feature, this template feature, what Ansible is first going to do is compare the contents of the file on my local system to the system I'm trying to automate against. If that file exists on that system, it's actually going to compare the two files and make sure that they are an exact match. Because essentially, if I wanted to at any point, what I'm doing in this example is just copying over an index.html file. If I were to make a change to that index.html file, I want to make sure that the most up-to-date version of that file exists on my destinations. But if they are exactly the same, Ansible is not going to execute that step. It's just going to move on to the next one. So something else that we provide, and this is more of a way of managing projects, but Ansible also provides something called roles. And this is really a way to write your direct automation commands or sets of tasks and also variables in a more reusable way. Red Hat actually ships several roles right out of the box. So these two roles that you're seeing here are common and web servers. Those are roles that Ansible and Red Hat actually provides out of the gate. So if you were trying to do basically that example that we provided before, which was, and I'm just going to jump back to this really quickly, just going from top to bottom, what this playbook is doing. So we're installing and starting Apache, right? This is just the Apache daemon that's running on a Linux server. The tasks that I'm doing is first using Yum. If you're not familiar, Yum is our package manager within Linux or within RHEL. So we're making sure that the package is present, that it's the latest version. That's the first task. Second task is we're copying that index file from my local system to my target destination systems. And the third is making sure that the actual Apache service is started so that I can actually have people going to my website. So we're going through, step by step, But this is something that I would have had to build on my own. I would need to have had a little bit of knowledge on, service management within RHEL. I would have had to build my index file and such. If I jump back to this example with roles, you can actually have that one playbook just referenced as a role, so a web server role, a role. And these can be shared. Essentially, they're ways of think of it almost like a golden image, right? And now you can share this role with a coworker or a different team or across your entire company to ease the adoption of automation and to also kind of define official ways to automate certain components. But really, this is all about creating shareable and reusable automation, right? You don't need to reinvent the wheel every single time. And as much as you may want to build roles yourself, you also have the ability to leverage roles that Red Hat and our partners have certified so that you don't even have to start reinventing the wheel. We provide the wheel for you. So where do roles, modules, where does all this come from? How do we manage them? Where do we get more of them? That's really where collections come from. So another component within Ansible are these collections, and really they're just a way of delivering content. It can contain all kinds of automation content. Most common are modules in those roles, so there's sets of playbooks that provide interfaces for typical use cases. They're versioned, very much like you would an application. They enable really collaboration and development of content, and they can be really easily distributed. They also lower the barriers to automate existing solutions. Collections can be used by your partners or by projects and also internal teams to write their own content. An example, let's say F5 releases a new router firmware. They're going to update the modules of their collections so that those can work with the new firmware. IBM QRadar, they ship a new set of features which enables like a new multi-step use case. The collection that includes that module is also going to be updated with a role that enables the call to call the use case with only a few parameters. So collections are a way of really structuring the data. Automation Hub is where these collections come. And this is really kind of what separates Ansible the product from Ansible the platform. Basically, these collections, they come from something called Automation Hub. It's a trusted source. It's something that's managed by Red Hat, a Red Hat hosted service that provides all these certified collections from Red Hat and from our partners. And so there is an on-prem version of this that we call Private Automation Hub, where you can also host and manage your own, internally, but you always have access essentially to this cloud.redhat.com Automation Hub. There's also a community version of this that we call Ansible Galaxy. It's basically an upstream source where there's non-certified content, but typically is going to be more bleeding. So you have a few different places where you can get access to getting started with all this kind of pre-built automation. And obviously you can always build your own playbooks, pretty simply and get started with that very quickly. So this is what Private Automation Hub architecture looks like. I won't spend too much on this, but basically you have the content provided on the left, whether that's from Automation Hub, whether that's from, just your developers building it, or from the Ansible Galaxy, the upstream version. It is then kind of funneled into or imported into this Private Automation Hub, and from there towards the different components of the platform, things like Ansible Tower. There the content itself is accessed and downloaded. Tower uses it to automate the systems all the way there on the right. And so it's a clear workflow, enables CI/CD pipelines, version views of content. Automation Hub can store multiple versions of specific collections, and you can use the specific version based on specific criteria, whether you have maybe it's based on a STIG or specific criteria for licenses. Whatever the criteria is, you can make sure you're using the right version at all times. So that's the create piece. Next, we're going to move into the operate side. And the automation content's really nothing without executing it, right? Running it against the nodes of your choice. And so executing automation is really what operators are worried about. And how do we operate all of this automation? How do we make sure we know what's being executed and where? How do we track all of it? So let's assume, you're an operator. You work for, Corporation X. You have a person that's running all the bits, and you're doing this stuff on the command line really regularly. So let's look at the bits and pieces. So what you're seeing here on the right side is actually a picture from Ansible Tower. And Ansible Tower is our kind of centralized web UI that allows you to execute and get a lot of visibility into the actual systems and projects that you're automating. What you're seeing is the actual execution of a playbook that was run from Ansible Tower. So this is the same playbook example we used before, running against a few different hosts. And basically what's happening is the playbook is interpreted task by task. Remember, it executes in order from top to bottom. And then in each task, a module is doing the actual work that we talked about before. Variables can play a role here. Each task then has that name. So we're seeing it actually printed where we have the name field next to the task that's being run. And so this has the added advantage of always knowing what a task is doing and knowing, one, if a change was made. Remember, I mentioned that Ansible's only going to make changes if it's necessary or if no change was made. This playbook that I ran, you'll see that the three tasks that we had defined, HTTPD package is present, latest index file is present, and then the service is started. Those three tasks on each of these three nodes that I ran it against, they all changed something. That tells me that that service didn't exist before, that index file didn't exist there before, and the service was started, obviously, because it didn't exist. Now, if I was to run this exact same playbook again against those three nodes, instead of seeing change for each of those tasks, I would just see OK, because no change would actually need to be. So we have the actual running of a playbook. What about the execution of content, right? Where does all our automation code actually get executed? So Tower is that central cluster, right? They're all essentially, all these systems are connected to this tower. Maybe more accurately, I should say that Tower is connected to all these different systems. And so this is where like management of the surroundings, like credentials, Git syncs are a part of this. All this is taken care of, and it provides this full audit trail of the entire execution. So what Tower is providing is central execution of the code. Teams don't have to worry about who needs to execute what. So your dev and ops teams can run automation code. They can use different Git repositories for their playbooks. They can use different credentials. They can target different server nodes that are spread across different data centers. But all of it is taken care of transparently via this automation cluster. So what you're seeing here is just a template. This is an example of just a template where you can actually build out a template that then any user can just hit a button and execute it. And it will have based on what playbook I want to run, what credentials am I using, what systems am I targeting. And then I can provide that to my teams who maybe aren't as technically apt to just push button automate. And then I mentioned this before, but Ansible has a concept of inventories, basically just a list of nodes to talk to, which can also just be grouped together. We have really simple, the ability to build really simple inventories. Could just be like basically a static like JSON or YAML file, what we call INI structures. And so it could just be a list of IP addresses. It could be a list of fully qualified domain names, and we can group them logically. But I can also have them generated dynamically by asking, say, like vSphere or Azure Cloud, or what machines are currently present and how are they tagged. And so what you're seeing here in this example on the right, we have my Ansible control node, but then we have 4 routers. And I have them grouped into a couple different groupings. So you can see, and hopefully it comes through clear enough, router 1 is a part of the Cisco group and is part of the Data Center 1 group. Router 2 is a part of the Arista group and the Data Center 2 group. Router 3 is also in the first data center, but it's a Juniper device. And then router 4 is another Arista device, and it's also in Data Center 2. So at any point, I can target just the systems or devices that are tagged as Arista, just the devices that are tagged for Data Center 1, etc. So ease of integration into existing infrastructure. There's no need to replace, your existing workflows and procedures. You can use the source of truth that's already there, whether that's your cloud environment, Active Directory, Red Hat Satellite. And so, you can have your cloud team start automating with the Ansible platform, and instead of having to manually collect the knowledge about all the existing virtual machines and updating that frequently, the information is all collected by those cloud accounts, and actions can be executed transparently among them. Now, one really key feature within Tower is building workflows. Workflows allow us to chain together these disparate jobs in Tower. So you'll see here on the right side, basically this graph-like structure, which you can modify in a visual editor. It just provides a really holistic overview of the automation and enables us to stitch together automation code from different teams, right? The ability to fork tasks to run simultaneously. You can provide logic for handling successful and failed outcomes. And so one example would be, you have a storage, a networking team, and an operations team. So all of them have their own code and their own repository. But whenever I'm, say, provisioning and configuring, an entire environment, I need to bring all that code together for a really complex deployment. The deployment can be laid out in this via a workflow, and I can enable the start the complex process around multiple teams just with one click. So each of these individual teams are building the automation for their piece, and then I can use a workflow to bring it all together so that I just have to press one button to actually execute all these individual pieces. A couple other features within Tower, obviously logging, visualization of automation, dashboard, analytics, all of this is really, really key. You'll see on the left side, that's the overview of the actual cluster. So as soon as you log in, this is the first thing that you see. Basically, you'll see at the top there, all the hosts that you're connected to, what inventories you have. If you're having those inventories dynamically fed, you'll be given also any inventory sync failures. You also see a list of projects and project sync failures. Those are projects that may be hosted on a Git repository. Below that, you'll see all the jobs that have been running. You'll below that see any recently templates or any recently run jobs. And you'll see the success and failure to be able to dive into those individual jobs and inspect the logs individually. And on the right side, we have automation analytics. That actually exists on the cloud.redhat.com side. And you can actually see who's using automation, right? If I want to see, is automation currently being run without trouble? I can check to see, current state, and I can see problems. I can also identify what the automation is doing, what organizations are using it, what use cases are being automated, as importantly, what use cases are not being automated, and I can get analytics to get more insights into all of this as well. So the final component here is the consume piece, right? Consuming automation is all about how to provide your automation content to others. This might be people who are not that technical. It also might be people from other IT domains, as I mentioned before, but it's all about bringing these teams together. And so automation is really nothing without people using it, right? Mapping it to their workflows, using it to make it shift and move things in their daily work. So let's go back to that scenario before. I'm a user of automation at Corporation X. I'm a person who needs stuff to be done. I want that to happen automatically. And I have a look at how we consume automation from the platform. So all of this is self-service, right? One of the core pieces that consumers will be using are the self-service capabilities, which enable that user to consume pre-created automation that's provided by others. The strength in offering this form of automation consumption is in reducing the required direct communication between the many consumers and the limited amount of developers. The people who are pre-created the automation content, they don't even have to know who's actually using the content itself. One thing to note here, credentials used in automation content are not exposed to the consumers. So people who write automation can even include necessary credentials without having to lose control, having a fear of losing control over it. So shown here are two ways to access self-service. You have the on-premise installed Ansible Tower option here on the left, and then you have the Red Hat hosted service category that both serve different use cases. But essentially, really, the one on the right is really just integrated through service. So really providing predefined automation to others to consume when and how they need it. Your ops teams can provide two different automation workflows to a dev team as self-service. one to spin up and tear down an entire development environment, and the dev team can use it when they need to without having to actually consult the ops team. So really kind of embodying that concept of DevOps as well. So before we jump into a quick overview of what we have to offer from a training perspective, I also wanted to mention, obviously we've just announced Ansible Automation 2.0, and there's some pretty big enhancements to the foundational pieces of Ansible, or to the Ansible platform to really enable automators to automate at scale more easily and more flexibly. And so I'm going to cover really quickly just three pieces that we've introduced as far as Ansible Automation Platform 2.0. Keep in mind that fundamentally everything that we've talked about today still exists within AAP 2.0. But the first is Ansible content is being separated from the actual executable in the Ansible project. We're creating a new construct called Ansible Content Collections to house Ansible modules and plugins and roles, and they're more in a discrete and atomic form. So, the vast majority of time has been spent relocating the majority of Ansible content, so the modules and plugins, into standalone Ansible collections that are developed and maintained separately from the open source project. So the main benefit is that updating Ansible content is no longer dependent on updating the Ansible project, which allows us to have like a really more continuous and asynchronous release of content while also maintaining the executable is stable. The second piece is more, obvious. So we've actually, the control plane is being separated from the execution plane within Ansible Tower, and we're renaming those components to Automation Controller and Automation Execution Environment. And so basically, Tower is being split into two components. We have the control plane and the execution plane, and all of this is to better scale and provide more predictable automation. By splitting it into two different components, you can now have execution running outside of the control node, and it's just more conducive to running your automation in the hybrid cloud or cloud native or container native environments, things like Openshift. So you'll see those additional features will be part of the upcoming 2.1 release, which I believe is either the end of November, early December. And then the third piece is a bunch of new tools were created to really enable enterprise automation developers. The first of which is an automation content navigator, what we're calling Ansible Navigator. And the second of which is Ansible Builder, or Execution Environment Builder. And they allow for really a more consistent experience for content that's developed on a workstation that's destined for an enterprise automation controller instance. And so it's made possible with automation execution environments, which are now much more predictable and portable and scalable compared to traditional Python virtual environments have been previously. So improved architecture, a variety of new tools to scale automation, but still providing that familiar Ansible experience to teams. And we want to provide all the information you need to get your automation teams up to speed. I'd highly recommend checking out the Ansible blog that's managed by our Ansible BU. There's a lot of really cool things that are coming out with 2.0 and with 2.1 very, very soon. And also keep an eye on the knowledge base on the Red Hat customer portal as well. It has all the latest documentation, installation, migration, component deep dives also exist within there as well. And then to get started, obviously we have a lot in the way of training. We do training, we've been doing training for a long time. We do train in a number of different modalities. Right now, pretty much everything is still virtual, although we are just now starting to kind of get back into the physical classroom. But we do offer all of these different modalities, whether it be virtual, live instructor-led training, which we can do in both a private and a public setting. If you and your whole team want to get trained up, we can do that, just an instructor with your team, sorry. And then we do offer individual access to some of these courses as well. So if you wanted to just take a single course and do that self-paced, we can do that as well. And then our learning subscription actually provides a year access to our entire catalog. So we have multiple Ansible courses I'll show in just a second. So if you're interested in taking a few courses, our Red Hat learning subscription is definitely a really viable option for that. And then we do also offer certifications. Those are also able to be taken remotely. We launched remote exams about 1.5 years ago. So you don't have to worry about going into one of our physical testing locations, especially if one hasn't opened up in your area yet. But you now have the flexibility of taking on your own hardware. You actually just boot from a USB. This is what this is. If you've never seen a USB before, no, this has our classroom image on it. So you actually just boot from the USB. You don't have to install anything on your local hardware. As far as the actual courses and curriculum that we offer and certifications, we have a few different kind of entry points. The first of which, or the first level that you're seeing here, is our technical overview. This is just a free, about an hour and a half, 2-hour video. Gets you really kind of familiar with some of the different concepts. A lot of what we covered today in this presentation. Below that, you're going to see kind of our 101 level or foundational level Ansible Engine or Ansible Automation focused course. This is actually building the automation across multiple infrastructures. So if you're a network administrator, we have a course geared towards automating your networking devices. Same thing for Linux administrators. If you're looking for a series of tasks to be able to automate and get experience with actually building the automation. Same for Windows administrators as well. Obviously, we are Red Hat Enterprise Linux is a core piece of our business, so we do have a second level RHEL-focused automation course. And then that all funnels down into our advanced automation course, which gets much more into Ansible Tower, as well as working with managing projects, managing larger and scaling out to have a larger footprint with your automation as well. But with that, we have time to take some questions, and then I'll kick it back to Olivia. Let me just jump into the Q&A and see if we had any or in the chat. And I don't see any. So with that, I will kick it back to Olivia. I want to thank everyone for your time. If you do have any questions around pricing, around the specific content of the course, Olivia is going to be your point of contact. Her and the team at Fierce will definitely be able to take care of you. But with that, I want to thank you all for your time, and Olivia, kick it back over to you.
Thanks, John. I just want to thank the Red Hat team again for helping us put on this Ansible event. And like John mentioned, you'll be getting an email from me after the event ends momentarily. Please reach out to for any questions, training needs. Oh, it looks like you got some questions in the chat, John.
All right. Can you install the Ansible Automation Platform locally? Yes, you can. In fact, you basically have a control node that's your local system, and you're automating against all of your kind of external systems. So yes, 100%. And then how do you get inventory for containers which have rapidly changing IPs? So typically you want to use some kind of source of truth. You can leverage something like, if those containers are running on Openshift, you can leverage Openshift for that. And actually there's like Kubernetes. If you're using Kubernetes for container orchestration, you can leverage Kubernetes to dynamically feed those IPs. And as those IPs change, your source of truth will update that automatically as well. If you're just running like native containers, native Linux containers, it's a little more difficult. It's a little more management that has to go into it. You could probably build out a Ansible script to do it. But yeah, leveraging those existing sources of truth is definitely the way to do that. And then dynamic inventory at task level. I'm not quite sure what you mean by that. I would need a little bit more information as far as that goes. Yes, you can essentially sync the dynamic. You can have your inventory sync dynamically at any point. You can even have it resync throughout your playbook. So you can have it sync at the beginning of a playbook run, and then even have it resync in the middle of a playbook run if you think that your potentially device IPs have changed even in that small amount of time. But definitely you can have it continuously sync and resync. And then can you customize the Ansible Automation Platform? Is it even necessary? If so, what does it take to customize it? Will you be effective if you know Python? I wouldn't say it's necessary to customize the platform. Certainly what you would want to maybe customize are the modules, and having developing experience in a specific language will be really helpful. Our developers for most of our modules are written in Python, but it's not necessary. I would say, I mentioned before, there's tens of thousands of modules that are available that Red Hat is certified, and even more that are available upstream. So I don't know that it's necessary. Typically, there are obviously going to be some very specific use cases where you may need to build your own module, but customizing the platform itself would never be necessary, at least as far as I'm concerned. But all very good questions. Right. And if that's it, then Olivia, I'll kick it back over to you again.
Okay, yeah, those were great questions. But thank you guys again for attending. Like I said before, you will be getting an email after with a recording of the webinar, as well as some follow-up material. Oh, it looks like we got a few more questions rolling in for you, John.
Yeah, so would you use Ansible Tower to centralize logging if installed locally? Yes. You can also leverage if you have if you have like an Elk Stack or something, if you use some kind of external third-party logging system, you could always leverage that too and integrate really easily. And then are there any monitoring tools that can be integrated with Ansible for automated fixes to configuration? Yes, 100%. I'm pulling up a list right now, but there are dozens of monitoring tools that will integrate into Ansible really, really easily. And if I'm just going to drop this into the chat as well, but you can see like all of these different monitoring tools integrate seamlessly with Ansible really easily. We want to make sure that, the whole point of this tool is to really extend the use cases of each of the different tools that you're already using within production, not necessarily to replace. And then what would I need Ansible if I'm using Kubernetes? If you can help highlight some key advantages with using Kubernetes, that's a whole other webinar. Kubernetes is really meant for container orchestration. I would say if you were running just a few like Linux containers, container orchestration is not really necessary. But the whole point of container orchestration is for portability, scalability, predictability, especially as you start to have hundreds or maybe thousands of containers that are all running locally or across multiple data centers. Kubernetes kind of takes care of scheduling and error handling and load balancing and all these different pieces. So Kubernetes has a million different kind of practical use cases, and Ansible can help to automate the tasks that, as far as like deploying containers onto Kubernetes, managing those containers, CI/CD component for container management as well can be handled by Ansible too. And then, what recommendations do you have for a Playbooks for Dummies resource? The Ansible website has a lot of kind of really cool like getting started pieces. I would start there, but Ansible Upstream is totally free, right? If you have a RHEL subscription, you have access to Ansible already, but if you don't, you can get started with Ansible Core, which is the basically the public version of Ansible. And there are thousands of different kind of exercises to get started. That's where I would start, is really just Ansible.com. Get started from there, and there's a lot of different resources on that website, but obviously we have training to help you really dive deeply into it. And then, is there a way to drag and drop playbooks into AWS Cloud Formation? I don't know the answer to that. I'll have to maybe follow up with that. I know you can create or delete an AWS CloudForm stack. There's a lot of CloudForm modules for AWS, but I don't know that it's as simple as just dragging and dropping. But certainly you'd be able to work with that. Yeah, a lot of really good questions here. Oh, and we got one more. How does Ansible Tower work with Openshift? There's a lot of different ways. I would say that a few examples would be if you wanted to automate the deployment or retiring of a specific pod, or if you wanted to scale OpenShift, you wanted to add a few control nodes, all of those, or worker nodes, all of those could be done using Ansible. I mean, really, the power of Ansible is really kind of limited only by kind of our imaginations, as cheesy as that sounds. But if there's a task that you're doing more than once, we can automate it, right? And Ansible is a tool to automate. And so there are thousands of tasks I can think of that you are doing repeatedly within Openshift. And Openshift has other kind of ways of automating as well, things like operators. But there's definitely things that you may want to wrap operators around to include other processes. If you wanted to deploy OpenShift onto Azure, onto AWS, you may want to wrap the actual deployment in Ansible playbooks so that you can automatically register and configure right off the bat as well. But I think we're right at the top of the hour or bottom of the hour.
Yeah, thank you again. Third time's a charm. You will be receiving an email with me afterwards with all the information. Thank you again to John and Alex on the Red Hat team for helping us put this on. And I hope you guys enjoyed the event today.